This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
And a very good afternoon, everybody. Live across Bloomberg platforms. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovec, live here on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. And we've got the Fed kicking off a two-day meeting, and we have stocks kind of cooling, pulling back from that record run that we've seen as of late.
Yeah, the Fed, earnings, economic data. There is a lot for investors to digest. Also, Carol, China and the U.S. agreeing to extend their tariff truce. We're going to be covering all of this in just a moment. Yeah,
a lot of headlines on that just over the last 30 minutes. Also coming up this hour, quite a treat, a double dose of CEOs in the drug space. AstraZeneca's CEO on today's better than expected results. We'll also talk about what is propelling growth at the company. And then we've got a second one, Tim.
Yeah, the CEO of Compass Pathways on the path to FDA approval of the first psychedelic treatment for some of those folks living with depression. So a great program coming up over the next hour right here on Bloomberg.
All right, let's take a look at trading because we've got stocks kind of bouncing along their lows of this session. Let's head on over to Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. Lots of moving parts to this market. We got you covered on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Fast-moving trade developments, economic data, the jobs report later in the week, earnings reports, Fed decision tomorrow. Right now, right to the markets with the S&P down 13, 63.76 where we stand. That is a drop now of 0.2%. Dow Industrials down 209, drop there of 0.5%. Nasdaq down 35, a decline now of 0.2%. Our Mag 7 index now slumping by 0.4%. 4 out of the 7 members of that index will be reporting earnings this week. Apple and Amazon Thursday, Microsoft, Meta Platforms tomorrow, and all 4 of those names are trading lower. The 10-year 4.33%, the 2-year 3.87% now on the 2-year. Gold up $13 the ounce, up 0.4%, and West Texas Intermediate crude now surging by 3.3%, closing in on $69 a barrel on WTI. Deal news: Union Pacific has agreed to acquire Norfolk Southern in a cash and stock transaction valued at $85 billion, forming a transcontinental rail giant. Shares of both railroads, however, are lower. Union Pacific down now by 3.1%, Norfolk Southern lower by 2.9%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Palatin. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, U.S. and Chinese negotiators have concluded their latest round of talks, trade talks, of course, that were underway in Stockholm, with an agreement to extend their tariff truce, or so it seems. We have some questions here. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer holding a press conference last hour in Stockholm. The Treasury Secretary saying an extension, not a done deal.
If we boomerang back to the April 2nd level, they would go to 34. I notice, as the earlier question said, that the Chinese deputy minister did say that we had agreed on a pause. We have not. Nothing is agreed until we speak with President Trump. He's on Air Force One, I believe, doing a press conference right now, and we will be seeing him in the Oval tomorrow to go over the deal with him, and then he'll decide if the pause continues as is.
All right, that, of course, was U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent earlier in Stockholm. With more on where we are, Bloomberg News correspondent Oliver Crook was in the room where it happened in Stockholm, where that press conference was went underway just about 35 minutes ago. Oliver, pause, no pause. I think we're all still kind of scratching our head to understand exactly what was agreed to.
Yeah, I think we were too a little bit, and that was helpful for the Secretary of the Treasury to cast a little bit more light on that. You know, far be it from Donald Trump to withhold any suspense from us. Basically, the 2 days of negotiations that we had by the Chinese Vice Premier, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, the Ambassador on Trade, Jamieson Greer, ended a couple hours ago. Then they briefed the media, and it ended, it seemed initially, by the Chinese saying that they basically a 90-day pause, the continuation of the truce between the United States and China, that would continue for another period of time. They didn't specify the period of time. Then we started to hear from the Americans with a slightly different story, that basically this is still conditional to Donald Trump's approval. We understand that Scott Bessent did speak with Donald Trump after the conversations before he gave that press briefing, but he's going to give a more complete briefing a little bit tomorrow in the Oval Office in the White House in order to get the final sign-off from Donald Trump, who may, change his mind, may demand something else. But again, the deadline that we're facing here is August the 12th, when these tariff rates will shoot right back up. So for the market, this is really a crucial thing to get over the line.
Interestingly enough, at least the equity market not reacting much to this news. Perhaps it was priced in. Perhaps there was the expectation that there would be some sort of extension here. I want to go to rare earths specifically, Oliver, and what we learned about the way that rare earths, not just today, but really over the last few months, have taken center stage when it comes to these negotiations. What do we know about that?
Well, what I think is interesting is that there were concessions on rare earths. There were concessions in exchange for that on the H20 chips by NVIDIA, by the United States, the allowing of selling them into China. And we should say that, one could interpret this as a sort of act of goodwill on both sides in order to try to make progress. But the reality of the situation is that for each of these economies, they're dependent on the other. There is no alternative for these technologies. This is not just an act of goodwill. This is the leverage that China holds over the United States. It is the leverage that the United States holds over China. And they did manage to make some breakthroughs on that. And again, this is something that was active in the discussions with the delegation from China and the United States today. We heard from Jameson Greer saying that I don't want to talk about magnets basically ever again. As far as they're concerned, the magnets should be flowing. They are flowing now, and that this should be a closed topic, and that they can then put that aside in order to make progress on the many other issues that are large issues between China and the United States. They'd like to basically put an end to it. And as far as they're concerned, they hope it's done.
All right, Oliver, back in June, President Xi of China, we know, invited President Trump to Beijing. Are the two leaders talking at all during these talks, or are they just waiting until, I don't know, the final terms? What's kind of going on behind the scenes here?
Yeah, I mean, our impression is that the last time that they spoke, this came up during the press conference, was in the call that they held in June. We understand that Xi Jinping did invite Donald Trump and the First Lady, Melania Trump, to China at some point. There has been some discussion today. I think there was a Donald Trump truth saying that basically he's not seeking a discussion with President Xi Jinping, but he has been invited. But this is really at the crux of the issue here, right? The Chinese, in the last few decades, have been building out their economy, have been building out their status on the global stage. They don't want to be seen sort of bowing theatrically to the United States on these trade issues. The Europeans have much less of a problem with that. They're being much more pragmatic about these sorts of things. But for the Chinese, this is not just about trade. This is about their status on the global stage. And I'll remind you that in Trump 1, the first Trump administration, these trade negotiations between the Chinese and the United States, they were held in Washington, D.C. These discussions today are being held in Geneva, the United Kingdom, in Stockholm, in neutral sort of third-party places. And we've seen what China's appetite is to escalate this trade war if they have to. They shot the tariffs up to 125%, which is how we got to this truce. But that is the sort of dynamic going into this. Both leaders want to appear strong and need to exert their leverage on the other.
What are the questions that remain unanswered at this point in terms of the details, the nitty-gritty, and what really needs to be hashed out here?
Yeah, so there are a panoply of different issues. For example, there's the issue of TikTok, right? There is a buyer potentially for TikTok in the United States. So says Donald Trump. The Chinese still need to give a nod to sell that. That is apparently something that did not come up in these conversations. There is the question of fentanyl. Bessent says that he is not pleased with how things have been progressing there. China could still be doing more. I mean, there is the issue of Russia, which increasingly we've seen Donald Trump change his position on Russia and Vladimir Putin. And we had a large discussion apparently between the two delegations today on the question of Russia. And Scott Bessent, again, airing their displeasure at the continued buying of fossil fuels, both from Russia and China, but also that dual-use military technology that they're seeing increasingly on the battlefield in Ukraine. So these were active discussions. And then there's also this question of the secondary sanctions that Trump is now talking about imposing on people who buy crude oil from Russia if Putin does not come to the negotiating table in the next 10 days. This came up in the press conference. And when asked, whether or not the Chinese position had altered, Scott Bessent said basically the Chinese take their sovereignty very seriously. They don't really want to be told what to do. And if they want to pay 100% tariffs as a consequence of buying Russian oils, then they will.
Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent said, we understand China's agenda much better. What is really the Chinese agenda? What is really the U.S. agenda? Is it just for both to kind of get wins here ultimately?
Well, what's interesting is, again, what we see the dynamic with the European Union and the United States. You have a situation with Japan, the UK, the EU, where they almost want to appear to be giving more to Trump than they are, sort of potentially giving these sort of, big sort of sweeping statements of committing to buying, $750 billion of energy, investment pledges of $600 billion. These are sort of big concessions. But again, there is a lot of room to fudge these sorts of things. With China, you have sort of the opposite dynamic, where the Chinese do not want to appear to be giving more. They want to appear to be giving less. And I think that really is the tone in these discussions. And I think that, again, what this meeting was supposed to do was to kick the can down the road another 90 days. You didn't get that today. I think that everyone is hopeful. And we should say, overall, the tone that we got from this press conference, from the ambassador and from the Treasury Secretary, they were saying that these were very, very constructive discussions. And even if we didn't get a deal today, they sort of were signaling, just maybe why you're seeing modest reaction in the market, that they will get it over the line.
Right. And we know another thing that will be a focal point is the Treasury Secretary say that they'll meet with the president in the Oval Office tomorrow. All right, going to leave it there. Oliver, thank you so much. Oliver Crook of Bloomberg News out there in Stockholm. In terms of kicking the can down the road, I think about how the Fed is ultimately going to take this into account tomorrow when it makes its decision.
Yeah, that's another big focal point this week for investors. Kicking off its two-day policy meeting today is the Federal Reserve. We'll get that decision tomorrow, the 5th of the year. No change in rates is expected. This is one of our most read stories on the Bloomberg, is about how upper-income Americans are increasingly falling behind on credit card and auto loan payments. It signals an underlying vulnerability in the U.S. economy as the labor market slows. With our preview of tomorrow's decision and our economic roundup, with us is Bloomberg News economics editor Molly Smith. She's in our Washington, D.C. bureau. Molly, a lot of economic data this week. Before we get to this most read story on the Bloomberg about the concern with these upper income Americans, with the economic data that we got today, the JOLTS, et cetera, anything of note stick out to you?
I mean, it seems like we're really just in this holding pattern right now, Tim, of like, what is the story going on with the U.S. economy right now? Are we in this place where the labor market is pretty resilient and consumer spending is decent but not great, and everything's just kind of humming along, and we can afford to keep interest rates pretty elevated right now because there is no real flashing warning sign in the economy right now? Or are some of these devil in the details really more the primary story of concern right now, which is what hopefully this week is going to illuminate with us when we have the GDP report coming tomorrow, then we have PCE inflation and inflation-adjusted spending Thursday, as well as the jobs report on Friday. So I think all of those things, and especially how Powell tomorrow characterizes the economy, is just really going to help set the tone for the rest of the year, and seeing which of these stories is the prevailing narrative for the economy right now.
Molly, how are you and the team kind of characterizing the economy on this Tuesday, July 29th? How are we seeing it right now?
I think right now that this is still an economy that, I mean, personally, of the belief seems like it's more the one that can afford to have interest rates at the level that they're at right now, that there hasn't really been a huge sign of deterioration really anywhere that would be urging for interest rates to be lower right now, that consumer confidence is improving now that, the real shock of the April tariffs has subsided and more trade deals are coming to the forefront. And it seems like the really harsh trade rhetoric is hopefully behind us. And the job market is more or less humming along. I mean, job openings have been pretty steady in the 7.5 million area for really the past year. There hasn't been really any movement one way or another suggesting that labor demand is really changing in any notable way. Of course, we've seen hiring is slowing, but it really is just still this low hiring, low firing environment where there aren't really a lot of layoffs. And yes, you will hear that people who are out of work are having a harder time finding a new job, but otherwise there isn't really a huge crack in the labor market. And that's what's really what people are waiting for to see, especially proponents of lower interest rates.
It's interesting because I feel like the actual government data and then anecdotal data, I think it was a Wall Street Journal story yesterday about Americans putting more into 401ks and then also tapping into the 401ks.
Pulling from 401ks.
More at the same time, there's that going on. You have the Atlanta Fed GDP now index above Bloomberg consensus for the second quarter. We had U.S. consumer confidence rises on the outlook for the economy and job market. It's hard not to feel like there's a fair amount of optimism, and the Fed has to be nervous and worried about inflation kind of rearing its ugly head. Fed policy, Molly, not an exact science. There is a lag effect. So with that in mind, does it make sense for a stronger or what does it make a stronger case for when it comes to Fed policy? As you said earlier, for the Fed to maybe do nothing at this point, because it seems like things are chugging along.
And that's exactly where the majority of the committee stands right now, is in that camp of thinking that we're okay to leave interest rates where they are. We're in a good place to really buy time and observe what's happening, and that we're not needed in this place to really proactively adjust interest rates for, a development in the economy that we're not sure might even happen. So that's really the challenge right now of where you're starting to see some factions emerge of, we have like Governor Christopher Waller and perhaps Governor Michelle Bowman as well, or Vice Chair, for Supervision, Michelle Bowman, that maybe the idea that the labor market is perhaps in worse shape than what the aggregate numbers might suggest, and where, those two could very well be dissenting if the decision is to hold interest rates steady tomorrow. So there is this division in the committee about the labor market, but also really the outlook for inflation and how tariffs will ultimately feed through to the economy. Is it going to be a one-time price shock that, ideology would tell you can otherwise look through and not really have to act on that from a policy perspective? Or is this going to be a more persistent effect through the prices that would suggest you should keep interest rates elevated for longer? And that right now is the division among a lot of people on the Fed board right now as to where inflation is going to end up and therefore where policy should go.
Okay, the question that everybody I know will have for the Fed chair tomorrow is about the president and the Fed chair in hard hats on Thursday at that tour of the Federal Reserve. What they talked about on that tour, the easing in tone that we heard from the president following that tour, the tension at the beginning of that tour. Is there anything constructive here to be asked or answered tomorrow?
I've actually read a few notes from economists saying that, really, any questions about this would frankly be a waste of time during the press conference, that Powell's been pretty defiant in, preaching for Fed independence, that he's not going to talk about, his job prospects. And of course, the race to replace him, or really the names that are in contention for, again, this is still 10 months away for when his term is up, that is not something that he's going to get into. So I think there's probably better time spent asking in seeing where does he lie in terms of, are we with most of the committee in characterizing the labor market and the economy as a whole as solid and broadly pretty healthy, or are we more taking something from the Christopher Waller argument that the labor market is, quote, on the edge? Because that really has been the biggest break from the committee so far, and it would be really interesting to see where Powell lies compared to the rest of those voices.
And yet, Molly, a question's going to come up. There's going to be something, right, in terms of his tenure, but he will probably dismiss it pretty quickly, right?
That's the expectation, right? So I think that's where some of these economists are, who aren't in the room, who don't get to ask Powell the questions, are maybe making their not so subtle pleas to journalists. Please don't ask these questions that aren't going to get answered, and instead focus on ones that we could actually make constructive decisions about.
All right, Molly, so appreciate you're a gem. Molly Smith, Bloomberg News economics editor, typically in New York, out there in our Washington, D.C. News Bureau. On this Tuesday, as we know, the Fed kicking off that two-day meeting, we will get that decision. 24 hours from now, we will know the Fed decision, and we'll be counting down to the Jay Powell press conference and waiting to see what he's asked.
What do you think they're talking about right now?
I don't know.
Inflation.
Yeah, I think, I was thinking about this when we got the headline about U.S.-China trade talks maybe being pushed off again. So it's another piece of uncertainty that if the Fed is saying, we got to wait to see what this deal really amounts to, or are there more complications?
Yeah, not exactly clarity yet.
No, exactly. All right, folks, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. The pursuit of FDA approval for one psychedelic drug company, Compass Pathways CEO, joining us next on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Traders are sending stocks lower ahead of the Fed decision tomorrow. Concerns about high valuations overshadowing hopes for an extension of a tariff truce between the U.S. and China. Right now, we are close to session lows on the S&P, down 15, 63.74 where we stand. That is a drop there of just about 0.2%. The Dow down 224 now, down 0.5. Nasdaq lower by 0.2%. Our Mag 7 index down 0.4%. 4 out of the 7 members of that index do report earnings this week. Microsoft and Meta kick things off tomorrow. Apple and Amazon on Thursday. 10-year 4.33%. The 2-year 3.87%. Gold up $15 the ounce, up 0.5%. And West Texas Intermediate crude above $69 a barrel, now $69.09, up by 3.6%. J.P. Morgan Chase is nearing a deal to take over Apple's credit card program. That, according to the Wall Street Journal, if it happens, J.P. Morgan will replace Goldman Sachs as the issuer of Apple's credit card. Right now, we got Apple down by just about 1%. J.P. Morgan Chase down 0.4%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he has suggested that psychedelic therapy for depression and trauma has the Trump administration's support. This actually was in a report by the Associated Press earlier this month that the secretary recently talked to members of Congress about. And we're guessing that it may have caught the attention of the team over at the publicly traded small cap company Compass Pathways. We wanted to know more, and let's get to Kabir Nath. He's Chief Executive Officer of Compass Pathways, and he joins us here in studio. Kabir, welcome, welcome. Remind our audience about the work you are doing and your synthetic psilocybin experimental drug for treatment-resistant depression. Tell us about where you are, what this drug is, and what it has shown to do so far.
Thanks very much, Carol and Tim, and it's great to join you here. So yes, at Compass Pathways, we're a company in the final stages of developing synthetic psilocybin as a potential treatment for treatment-resistant depression, or what we call patients living with persistent depression. That's a big problem affecting some 3 million people in the US, and it's debilitating. Many of them are unable to work. The majority will have had some sort of suicidal thoughts in the course of their depressive illness. So we're a leading psychedelic company and potentially the closest to regulatory approval.
You've used the word potential twice. You said it's a potential treatment, and you said potentially you're a leading company there when it comes to FDA approval. Is it unproven?
We have generated robust evidence now from 2 studies. The first was published a couple of years ago, and then just last month, we released more data from the first of our final stage studies. So what can I tell you about that? First, safety. We didn't see any unexpected safety signals in this treatment of patients living with persistent depression. And secondly, after just a single treatment, after 6 weeks, we saw a significant reduction in depressive symptoms. And just to emphasize that, because you'll be aware of the typical paradigm of antidepressants, something you take daily, this was a single treatment, and with the effect measured after 6 weeks. Now, we already are 2 for 2 in terms of these trials, clinical trials that we've conducted, but we're continuing to see more evidence generated first in one of these late-stage trials, and second, we have another study ongoing where we're also looking at the impact potentially of another treatment.
We should point out that about a month ago when that study came out, the stock, your shares tumbled almost 50%, hitting a record low. What I guess I want to understand, so it was below what Wall Street expected. It did meet your goal, from what I understand, your company goal, but Wall Street was very disappointed. Tell us how this works. How does one psilocybin treatment kind of cure depression, persistent depression?
Psilocybin you can think of as, if you like, a key that unlocks a door or a set of doors in the brain. And while those doors are open, that enables the patient to work through some of their fixed negative thinking and potentially have relief from their depressive symptoms. To do that, there is a profound subjective experience. So there is a psychedelic experience that lasts 6 to 8 hours. And as I say, during the course of that, the drug is working in such a way that it unlocks these doors and allows the patient to engage with some of those negative thoughts and potentially, as I say, get relief from those depressive symptoms. The fact is, as I say, we've seen, and what's amazing, that one single treatment can show sustained effects at least 3 to 6 weeks and potentially longer. In our earlier trial, our earlier clinical study that we did, we saw that for many patients that was sustained out to 12 weeks.
What's many? How many? Forgive me, Tim. Like, I'm just curious, how many?
So that was a study of around 230 patients, of whom a significant number were on what we call the active dose of the medication. And what we saw was a quarter of them had, from that single dose, they were actually sustained free of depression out to 12 weeks. And in this population of people who have typically tried multiple treatments and for whom very little is any longer working, that was a remarkable response.
When patients do take this single dose, what is the environment that they're in during that 6 to 8 hours? And are they guided in some way by a therapist of sorts?
It's a calm, comfortable setting. They have the option of eye shades, there's music playing, and there are appropriate safety safeguards in place. Psilocybin is a very inner-directed mechanism. So what actually happens is the patient has this profound influence, but while there is somebody in the room, it's largely silent. There is not directed therapy in the course of that intervention.
How do you run an effective clinical trial for a drug that the experience is such that the person knows they've taken this drug rather than a placebo? Somebody who takes a placebo is not going to have a psychedelic reaction to the placebo.
At Compass, we thought about this before we even started our studies. So our prior big study, the one I referenced with 230 patients, we designed that in such a way that there was the choice of 3 different doses of psilocybin. One was a low dose, a second was an intermediate dose, and in patients who've never had this experience before, that's truly confounding in terms of they cannot tell whether they got a medium dose or a high dose of that drug. This is important because, as you say, otherwise it will be very obvious. But that design was very effective for that earlier stage study we did, and we've replicated that design in one of our late stage studies.
We're talking with Kabir Nath. He's Chief Executive Officer of Compass Pathways here in studio. You keep saying synthetic. What's the difference between synthetic and naturally occurring?
So we are manufacturing a pill to the highest standards of purity, no contamination. We know exactly what is in the pill. This is a manufactured pill that we are treating with.
So that you know exactly in terms of dosage. Is that what I'm saying? So if naturally occurring is different?
Potentially.
Okay.
It is naturally occurring. Whereas ours is synthetic, so we know exactly what's in it. We know the exact pill.
What will it cost?
It's premature to speculate on that at the moment. We're still conducting these final stages of our studies.
But expensive? And would it be something, I mean, if you get FDA approval, is it safe to make the assumption that it would be covered?
The whole premise for founding Compass Pathways was to enable that form of broad access. So the reason that the company has gone through doing these rigorous, robust clinical studies so that we can discuss that with the FDA, potential for regulatory approval, and then, if we're fortunate enough to get there, the chance to negotiate with both commercial insurers and government payers. Let's remind ourselves that these 3 million people that I referred to, they are relying on insurers, commercial insurers and government payers to actually cover their drugs. I believe we will be able to demonstrate significant value given how different this is from other treatments available today in depression.
Kabir, Carol mentioned that the Associated Press reported earlier this month that RFK Jr. recently talked to members of Congress about psychedelic therapy for depression and trauma. Apart from that, have you seen any real signs of support for the administration for this new class of drugs or type of treatment?
We have had support from the FDA throughout our development process. We have breakthrough designation.
So even before Robert F. Kennedy Jr. took over as HHS?
We have had a motivated and engaged agency. We're excited to see the voices from HHS, from Veterans Affairs today, suggesting that they also see the potential for this class. And we're very happy to work to see how we could potentially accelerate access, while at the same time ensuring that we continue to generate really good, robust, good evidence that these are safe and effective.
Talk to us about timeline, though. I feel like I know Bloomberg's been reporting on this class of drugs and treatments, and I think we've all seen pieces
for years.
Right, for a long time, that for people where other treatments don't seem to be making a change for them. So I don't know. Is it another few years? Is it the end of this year? Is it the end of next year? And is it, that the Trump administration could somehow shuttle this through much more quickly?
I think There are clearly people in the current administration who, as I say, see the potential of this, but we want to make sure we do this right as well. So we want to make sure we do that in the right way with the right rigor and so on. We are conducting, as I say, the final stages of studies. We have 2 ongoing, of which the second will wrap up in the second half of next year. The data we released last month, though it hasn't yet been reviewed by the FDA, we have a meeting planned with them where we'll discuss with them, and we'll discuss the potential for any acceleration of a filing and a regulatory process.
Do you also think about other usages, whether it's PTSD and other applications? And I'm just curious what you might be exploring in that world.
Our next priority beyond persistent depression is indeed PTSD. That is something with very high prevalence, some 13 million in the US, for which there are only 2 very old drugs approved. And unfortunately, recently, there have been 2 advisory committees recommending against new drugs in that space. So yes, we see PTSD as a key area. We generated some data last year, and we will be announcing the design of another late-stage trial for PTSD imminently.
I know the US FDA is the gold standard for going through the regulatory process to be viewed by the world as a credible treatment for something. But these days, is it worth going after approval in another country to try to do this on a smaller scale to prove that, yes, it indeed works?
We will be exploring approval in a range of countries. So our studies have been international, US, Canada, Europe as well. We have taken advice over the years from the European regulatory authorities. We're a UK-based company as well, so we've been speaking to the MHRA, the regulatory authority in the UK. So yes, this is a problem, sadly, for patients across the world, and we would look to exploit it where we can.
Kabir, just got about 30, 40 seconds. We're actually going to be talking with the CEO of AstraZeneca right after this. I'm just curious, in terms of big pharma, have you had any preliminary discussions with larger pharmaceutical partners interested in commercialization, co-commercialization, or distribution?
What I know is the big pharma is tracking this space closely, and what's been great is to see the re-entry of some big pharma back into psychiatry over the last couple of years. So I know they watch this space, but we at Compass are determined that we can do this ourselves and are excited about the opportunity to bring this potential new treatment to patients who so clearly need it.
So no strategic alignment that you would consider. You plan on doing this alone?
That's our plan.
Okay, great stuff. Stay in touch.
Thank you
and let us know how things are going. Really appreciate it. Kabir, be well. Kabir Nath, he's Chief Executive Officer of Compass Pathways, joining us right here in studio. As we mentioned, we're going to stay in the pharmaceutical space.
That's right. We've got the CEO of AstraZeneca coming up in just a minute. We're going to talk results, tariffs, growth, and more with the CEO. That's next on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all trading lower, but the NASDAQ 100 index just turning positive. Little changed, up under 0.1%. S&P down 11, keeping it all in context, down 0.2%. The S&P now at 63.78. The Dow down 208. A drop on the Dow of 0.5%, while the NASDAQ Composite Index is down 24. For NASDAQ, a decline right now of 0.1%. Our Mag 7 index down 0.3%. 4 of the Mag 7 members will report this week. We'll be hearing from Microsoft and Meta tomorrow. Apple and Amazon will report on Thursday. 10-year yield 4.33%. The 2-year 3.88%. Gold up $15 the ounce, up 0.5%. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil is now surging by 4.1%. WTI 69.48 a barrel. Boeing managed to almost halt its cash burn in the second quarter, indicating that a turnaround initiated by CEO Kelly Ortberg a year ago is paying off as the company delivers more aircraft, but Boeing shares down now by almost 4%. Elsewhere in the airline industry, JetBlue Airways higher after the carrier posted a smaller than expected loss in the second quarter. JetBlue up by 3.9%. American down 1.1% among other carriers. United down 1.2%. 3.8%, and Delta down now by just about 2.2%. And President Trump says he will give Russia 10 more days from today to reach a truce with Ukraine, formally announcing a new deadline to pressure Vladimir Putin on ending the war. Recapping S&P down 0.2. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, got it, Charlie. Thank you so much. Well, as you know, tariff talks continuing, as do presidential statements about more manufacturing back here in the United States. The pharmaceutical industry among the latest to be targeted by President Trump, who made comments Monday from Scotland.
We'll be announcing on pharmaceuticals sometime in the very near future. We have a very big plan on pharmaceuticals. We want to bring a lot of the pharmaceuticals back to America where, where they should be. We're going to want to be making a lot of them ourselves, all of them in a sense. But you also have a good pharmaceutical business. We'll be dealing with you on pharmaceuticals.
All right, that, of course, was President Trump on Monday from Scotland. We've got a great voice on this and really the overall pharma industry, big pharma, a company that reported earnings earlier today. We're talking about AstraZeneca. ADRs of the company, by the way, are rallying more than 4% in today's session. Great to have with us in studio Pascal Soriot. He is AstraZeneca's Chief Executive Officer, also with us, a member of our editorial team here at Bloomberg, knows this company and industry so well as Bloomberg News health reporter Madison Muller. Pascal, by the way, also former CEO of Genentech. Thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure. Thank you.
It's a pleasure for us. Big space, a space that's certainly garnered the attention of President Trump. I am curious, in terms of the president talking about more manufacturing in the United States, and I know you guys are making some further investments here. Talk to us about how presidential policy is impacting maybe your business.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's a great question, but first of all, it's important to really think about what every country would want to do. Every country would want to make sure they can secure the health of their citizens. It's a question of national security. So nobody should be surprised that the president wants to reshore manufacturing of pharmaceutical products. I personally have seen this happen since several years, and we decided several years ago to increase our manufacturing footprint in the US so we can actually manufacture medicines for American patients in America. Every country would want to do that. And a big country like America, of course, can afford to do it.
You said that you made that decision several years ago. How much of the $50 billion pledge was planned before the president threatened these tariffs?
Well, we've been pursuing this strategy of manufacturing in China for China, in the US for the US, since 5-6 years. And quite frankly, COVID actually showed us we were on the right track, because we all saw what happened during COVID. And so we accelerated this movement. And so our 50 billion commitment is a commitment to R&D, but also a commitment to manufacturing. We announced together with the governor of Virginia a multi-billion-dollar investment in manufacturing in Virginia. And the governor of Virginia has been incredibly fast with his team, 33 days to reach an agreement. It's incredible. So we're very happy to be there. We are building a new R&D site in Kendall Square, Cambridge, Massachusetts, with 2,500 scientists that will be working there. And there's more to come. We are just finishing the build of a cell therapy manufacturing site in Rockville, Maryland. We've expanded in California. So it's a sort of a multi-pronged effort across many states across the U.S.
You've said that Virginia obviously has made it easy to make manufacturing investments there, and North Carolina is pretty similar. Are there other states in the U.S. where you're having these types of good conversations that are, incentivizing businesses like yours to invest?
Well, it's hard for me to point at any state that is better than another. Let me just say that working.
We have no problem noting which states are better than others. We're all from different states.
What do you like more, New York or New Jersey?
Let me just say that a company like ours follows the science. So science is key. And so you need to be able to recruit the right scientists, the right engineers. And in Virginia, you can do this because you have some of the best universities. The other part is dealing with partners in the public sector that understand us, that we trust each other, we can move fast. I always tell people in our company, talk about AstraZeneca speed, because there's a lot of competition, we need to move fast. I've learned Virginia speed. The governor has moved so quickly. So this is the kind of thing we want to see, whether it's in America, in a state, or in a country. We want speed, and we want people who understand how we think.
You want speed. You want people to understand how you think. You said you want to follow the science. There's been criticism that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, has not necessarily always followed the science with his comments when it comes to medicine, when it comes to drugs, when it comes to vaccines. How do you look at that and his role there?
Well, I'm not here to actually get involved in political discourses. Let me just say that as a company, science is at the heart of everything we do. The reason we have such a large oncology pipeline in particular and beyond is because we focused on science for the last 10, 12 years. And America is where science in our industry is happening. And that's why it's so critical to preserve this biosciences leadership the US has globally. China is also becoming a very big source of innovation in our industry. Europe, unfortunately, is falling behind for a variety of reasons. So innovation is happening here. We need to keep this going. We need to actually continue supporting the leadership. And that's why we invest $50 billion in this country, not only in manufacturing, but also in R&D.
What about China? I'd love for you to kind of explore that a little bit. What are you investing in and building out in China? And what might surprise our audience about the innovation that's happening in China, especially when it comes to pharmaceuticals?
Yeah, I think, great question. I think we need to start with the hypothesis, the assumption that basically the more products or the more innovation exists in the world, the better it is for everybody, for every patient. Because if you're a patient with cancer, the only thing that you care about is to be cured, if you can be cured, right? And so innovation in China has really ramped up very rapidly in the last few years. China has gone from making generics to Me Too's to Me Too Plus, what we call Me Too Plus in our industry, to truly innovate these days, and innovate in new technologies, in cell therapy, in siRNA, in many, many technologies. And so China has become the second engine of innovation, not as big as the US. The US remains the leader in that field, but China is ramping up very quickly.
Is the administration, with some of its, some would say, questionable disruptive policies, there's been a lot of reporting about scientists kind of leaving the United States and going elsewhere. Are you seeing signs of that, whether it's to Europe, to China, to elsewhere? Because of not supporting, academia and academic universities. Some of that seems to be coming back, but
yeah, but in these things, it's always difficult to discern what is anecdotal versus what is systemic. What we have seen in China is really a substantial return of scientists from the US, but also from the UK and elsewhere. But not because of policy, simply because they could see opportunities in China. There is money, there is capital that can be invested. The Chinese are willing to take risks. The government has facilitated the return of the scientists, and they've come back. But I can tell you that a lot of the scientists we work with in China, in biotech companies that we partner with, many of these people are American. They're American Chinese. I mean, they go back and forth, back and forth. They are a bridge between the US and China. But they've gone to China because of the opportunities to create a company, be funded, take risk, and hopefully be successful. And by and large, they've been quite successful. I want to say, though, that the leadership remains with the US, and we need to maintain this, of course. The country needs to maintain this.
There's been some concern, though, that companies like yours, not necessarily Astra, but big pharmaceutical companies are going to China for most of their biotech deals now. What would you say to that, and what would U.S. biotech companies need to do to sort of attract investments from you all?
The first thing I would say is that if you're a patient, you don't care. What you want is a drug that will help you, right? So when we do a deal with a Chinese company, typically it's because they've discovered a product and they need help to globalize it. Because discovering something in a lab is one thing. It doesn't require a huge amount of money. It requires very talented people, but the capital requirement is limited. When you want to develop globally, then you need the scale. You need billions of dollars of investment in phase 2, phase 3. And you need the scale. You need the people, the expertise. So what we do is we license in the product, and then we develop them globally and then bring them to patients. So the innovation started in China, but becomes a global medicine for everybody. So it really benefits everybody around the world.
I want to go back to sort of a global domestic question, the idea of your listing. And the Times of London has said that AstraZeneca is looking to move its listing to the US. Are you going to do that?
You could just share it with us.
Yeah, we don't comment on rumors. And, as a company over the last 10 years, we've had so many rumors. We don't comment on rumors. The only thing I will say really is the United States is really core to our company. By 2030, we expect 50% of our revenue to come out of the United States. Today, it's 45%. Wow. We grew tremendously in the U.S. in the first half. The U.S. is the country that innovates, I just told you, but also the country that uptake the innovation faster. Patients benefit much faster. So we want to invest here and we want to grow here, and that is a very critical part of our company globally.
Just curious in terms of growth, we've talked about earnings, and your cancer drugs are certainly important in terms of growth. Where do you see kind of the most significant growth trends when it comes to pharmaceuticals? We've spent the last, Madison, last couple of years talking about the obesity drugs and weight loss drugs, but where do you see it? We talk often about genes and genetic and immunotherapy. Where do you see the real growth coming in the next, 5 to 10 years?
It's a great question, but it's almost all of the above. I mean, of course, managing, managing what I would call central or abdominal fat. Because everybody talks about obesity. What really matters is how much fat do you have in your abdomen that surrounds your liver, your pancreas, your heart, and creates inflammation and insulin resistance and all the consequences we can think about, hypertension and others. So this is really a big epidemic globally. We need to address that, and that's what companies like Lilly and Novo are doing today, and we want to do this with oral agents. But then, we have development in antibody-drug conjugates. We have developments in bispecific antibodies for cancer. One of the most exciting new technologies is cell therapy, because cell therapy will apply to hematology cancers, but also potentially solid tumors and immune diseases. We have now cases, small numbers, early days, but small cases that young women who suffer from lupus, which is a terrible disease.
I have a family member who has lupus.
Can be cured. I mean, these patients, their life is about taking drugs, steroids, with all the consequences you can imagine. Their organs are destroyed over time by the disease. They can be cured. You have people with myeloma that can be cured. And so as we progress this technology and make it more usable, more easily usable and more affordable, it can really transform many fields of medicine, from oncology to immunology.
I know you've had an amazing tenure at Astra, and there's sort of an obsession in the UK with your succession plans and what comes next. Not to say that you're leaving anytime soon.
We don't want you to go.
We don't want you to go. What do you want to accomplish before you end your tenure at Astra?
Well, one of the things is that I wanted to do is have a great team, and I have a great team. That's it. I have really a fantastic team, and that's why nobody should worry about my succession. We have a great team and people who can succeed me. So that's, I think, one thing, and we constantly try to improve the team, not only my direct reports, but their direct reports and the company as a whole. Two is, the second piece is almost unachievable, because science is never going to be stopping. And the more I progress, the older I get, the more science gets exciting, and the more excited you. I mean, there's no better time to be in our industry than now. There's so much innovation, so much hope to cure diseases that cannot be cured today. And the last thing was really to finish our site in Cambridge, because I keep joking internally, I want to have the two Cambridges, one in Cambridge, UK, one in Cambridge and Boston. But that's for the joke. But the most exciting really is the science and the pursuit of new technologies and new products that will make a difference and change the future of medicine. So those are the things I want to address, but I have to accept at some point biology is going to catch up with me. And
unless you create a pill that keeps us going. I'm kind of keeping my fingers crossed. Exactly. GLP-1s, right? We think it's going to be cure-all. Pascal, we really enjoyed this.
Thank you so much for having me.
For all the time. Pascal Soriot, he is AstraZeneca's Chief Executive Officer, and of course, Bloomberg News' own health reporter, Madison Muller. Always a must-read on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com.
Hey, taking a look at markets right now with just over an hour to close of equity trading here, down 0.2%. 1% on the S&P 500. The Dow down half a percentage point. The NASDAQ Composite down about 0.2%. Investors certainly have a lot to focus on this week when it comes to not just economic news, but also everything happening with earnings after the bell tomorrow and on Thursday. And then, of course, also from the Fed chair, that press conference that we hear tomorrow, Carol.
Yeah, it's going to keep us super busy. I'm Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovec. Let's get to some of the stocks on the move today. With us is Bloomberg News equities reporter Nora Melinda. Number one, what do you got?
So I'm looking at shares of Novo Nordisk. Of course, super fitting based on the conversation you just had here with the CEO of AstraZeneca. We're seeing shares of Novo Nordisk, though, that is ticker NVO. We're seeing them down for double-digit losses today. Really steep declines. It's actually its worst daily performance since 1987. And this is after the company had a steep cut to its outlook here. It's really having a lot of investors a little bit worried about its performance moving forward, especially because of the fact that it's really apparently struggling to find market share against the likes of Eli Lilly's drug, which is Zepbound. Of course, we know that Novo Nordisk really has Wegovy. They're struggling with sales there. But additionally, they did actually mention that they have a new CEO that will be coming. We knew that that was going to be a change that was made, but it's going to be an insider here. So that's kind of what I'm looking at in that space.
ADRs of Novo Nordisk down more than 21% right now. Palo Alto Networks, PANW, what's going on?
Absolutely. We're looking at shares of this company. They're also a bit lower right now, but it is in talks to acquire an Israeli cybersecurity provider, CyberArk Software. And they're saying that this could mark the one of the biggest tech takeovers this year. So really interesting stuff as we're parsing through, and people are saying that it could potentially be finalized as soon as later this week. So really got all eyes on this company right now.
All right. Woohoo! I'm trying to make our railroad sound. The deal finally happening.
Yes, the deal finally happening.
I give you a B, Carol. That was pretty good. That one was good. A minus for that one.
I'll work on it. We got a railroad deal just quickly.
Of course, we have the deal between Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern here, which was, of course, has been really long awaited here. $72 billion deal, cash and stock transaction. Lots of eyes on it, of course, here. This will be the biggest transcontinental railroad in the United States.
But both stocks down by a lot. So maybe because it's been out there for a lot.
Maybe it's old news now at this point, Carol.
I don't know. We like railroads.
Who doesn't?
Who doesn't? Nora, thank you so much. Bloomberg News equities reporter Nora Melinda. For more conversations, be sure to check out our Stock Movers podcast, 5-minute episodes, because winners and losers. You can find it anywhere you get your podcast. You can check out Apple, Spotify, and as we said, anywhere else you download them. That's going to do it for us this hour.
That is, but we are talking planes, trains, and automobiles, and this deal with Brooks Sutherland in just a few minutes. Also, we're talking trash with the president and COO of the company formerly known as Waste Management.
Love talking trash.
We do.
Literally trash. This is Bloomberg.